My association with the Ohio grain industry started in 1954 when I, with Al Oliver, who was then president of the National Grain and Feed, and visiting East Lansing, we came down, at that time I was at Michigan State, came down to the first combined associations of the old Ohio farmers and the independent, so to speak, grain association. February in Toledo, a cold February as I recall. Then in 1959, I was asked if I would be interested in becoming the exec of the Ohio Association. And I came down, in fact, we met in Findlay at the country club. There's a couple of guys still alive who were interviewing me, Bob Rudy being one over to Covington, still a member of the association, the firm is, Rudy's. And I thought probably I blew that. It was a good conversation with them, wanted to know my background and all this. And the George Forrester of Forrester Grain Company up Toledo asked me a question about, how much would I need to run a car and so forth. And I said, well, I'd like 12 cents at least at that time. And he said, well, I want you to have enough money so you can buy me a drink whenever you're in Toledo. Well, I promptly replied, well, I'm not a teetotaler, but two things. One, I don't believe in drinking in the middle of the day. And secondly, I don't believe in using association money to buy other people drinks. When I went out the car, I told Agnes, she was sitting in the car, she went down with me, they didn't ask to interview her. I probably blew this thing, but at least I can live with it. Boots O'Brien, when I did come down in August, was over in Greenville. He had run the association, he had run the old Wayne milling firm over there, a feed plant in Greenville. And his wife kept the books. Terrific. No, very few associations execs take over a new job and find the books accurate to the penny. The books were accurate to the penny when I took them over. But Boots told me before, we were supposed to play golf, but it was very hot that day, and I was pleased when he said it was too hot to go out and play. But before I left, he said, Greenleaf, with your $11,000 salary, this association is going to be broke in 2 years. And of course, one of my objectives was to keep it from being broke, at least more than 2 years. My first call was to board members, of course. And maybe this is a good time to tell you that at that time, the way I took the job was that I could not solicit landmark members at that time. We did have a couple, but I said, well, if any landmark member comes in, we have to accept them. They're legitimate. They're a co-op like some of you are co-ops. So we said, I will not solicit for the first 2 years. And so ends a saga, because 11 years later, Kenny Probasco, who was the exec landmark, became the association's president, so we came a long ways. There was only one director that had a mission for me. He said, they are starting to tax all the equipment in grain elevators, saying that dryers or when you put grain through the plant, it doesn't change, it's still wheat. And I said, well, what's your plan? And he said, well, I know the tax commissioner. And I said, let's make a date. And if you knew Dick Trout down in Pleasantville, John, you might remember him, he just get on the phone and called him, and we made an appointment and went down and argued the case. We had some notes that we'd put together with a couple of other people too. And sure enough, within 2 weeks' time, that was all changed by the commissioner's edict. And that was my first victory, which really was Dick Troup's victory. Dick also started legislative breakfast in 1961 when the convention was in Columbus. The 1960 convention was, my first one was up in Toledo, and some way stumbled through it, and I think I discovered that those folks are going to have a good time and they're not going to notice the mistakes you made or your staff made, and that was kind of a relief. The start of the big conventions really didn't get going until 1963 when we had 1,500 registered in Columbus. Then one of the tactics they wanted to do was to change the dues year to a calendar year. Well, at $20, $25 was about where we were at that time per plant. We decided on a plan so that every year would be 9 months. And so for 3 years, we had 9-month years until we got to the calendar year, and moved it back, and that probably saved us because we never could have skipped 6 months dues and made it successfully. In 1964, with a lot of help from People to People, we took 50 members to Russia. And it was one of the things that I did more than ever after that, almost more than I should have, I thought sometimes. And in December 1 of 1964, I played a part in the development of the Ohio Ag Council, which was modeled after the Michigan. In fact, we took their constitution, and folks like Roy Common, of course, John Stackhouse was there at that time, the Ohio Bankers Association, of course, Farm Bureau was present at the meeting. And so I think it was December 1st of 1964 that we met for the first time and approved the bylaws and started the Ag Council, which is still going very, very well. 1967's convention, we had Gerald Ford and Robert Taft, and we changed the name to the Ohio Grain, Feed, and Fertilizer Association. It's hard enough to put that on a letterhead, let alone use all those terms. In September of '66, the association held its first annual golf outing. A fellow by the name of Carl Mailing up at Delaware Farmers Exchange had been to the Oil and Gas Association's meeting, and he called me about 9 o'clock at night and said, "What a great idea for fellowship and so forth. Let's start a golf outing." So I said, "Well, I'll talk to him in the morning and see." And so when I called the Oil and Gas Association, I said, "I already had a great golf outing." He said, "We did." I said, "How much did you make?" He said, "I lost $7,000. So I thought, well, there goes the golf outing. So I called Carl back and I said, "Hey, they did have a great," he tells me it was a great meeting. Yeah. I said, "You know how much they made?" He said, "Well, must have been up in the 4 figures or so." And I said, "No, they lost $7,000. He said, "Give it to me. We won't lose a penny." And I think, unless the 2 execs here, Gary and John, tell me differently, I don't think we ever lost any money on a golf outing. And it proved to be a great membership fellowship thing. In February of '72, we did kind of a playlet on Your Industry on Trial. And if you knew John Sharp, he was the plaintiff. The prosecutor was one of the execs at Ohio Farmers. Don Shriver was the defense attorney, and some of you know Don Shriver, I'm sure, still around. And Moorhead Elevator was the defendant. George was the past president. In '73, we started making cassettes of all the convention speeches that were really worthwhile or we thought worth putting together on tape, and we sold them. I think they started out at $4, and gradually it got up to $7 and $10, and maybe we put 2 things on a cassette to help it along. We finally had one victory in the court. Buckley Brothers are being sued by the state of Ohio because of the Ohio Tax Department's deal that an elevator was personal property. The dryer and all those things, even though they were included in the building. And we won with our attorney in the Ohio Appeals Court. In 1977, which was our 98th annual convention, the keynoter was Senator Robert Dole, and we had Senator Dick Clark, a Democrat from Iowa, but a strong member of the Ag Committee. And of course, he was introduced by our Democrat at that time, Director of Agriculture, Mr. Abercrombie. 1978, John Volz came up to my house in the evening. John, you worked late that night, and see if I would be interested in going with representing Ohio, along with a farmer member, along with the 12 states in the Midwest, to a month-long visit to China. I'm sorry, I didn't even ask Agnes. I think I told John right there, yes, John, I want to go. And I gave about 80 slide presentations to about every co-op in the state and a lot of other meetings because it was such an interesting time and I could relate it back to my early days on the farm, the hand labor and all the rest. In December 1st of that year, and I don't think it had anything to do with your China invitation, John, we hired John as Director of Association Services, and it was a great addition to our association. I'd been a lone guy, and I had Len Getz for a little while, brought him over from the Lumber Association, but John brought a lot of professionalism and quality to the program. 1979 was a great highlight, and John will take a lot of credit and should with that because we had John Glenn as our keynote speaker. We chose 100 outstanding agricultural leaders, and about 30% of those were not members of our industry that the board voted on. And I had some good friends that didn't make the 100 list, so it wasn't a happy time sometimes. And I have to close by saying even though it was a great snowstorm in 1984, it was my last convention, and John Foltz largely led, planned, and developed the program. It turned out that in some way he organized it so that $55,000 came into our thing for my gold Cadillac, except I guess we decided a gold Cadillac didn't fit me very well. And with John's leadership again, we gave it. I think the only foundation money that went to Ohio State that goes to several other educational institutions. And I have to give John a lot of credit because that Agri program to Penta, which no longer, but Clark, ATI, Wilmington College, and of course OSU's College of Agriculture, has helped a good many young people. And it's surprising how many come up to you and say, thanks to you, I was a part of this. In fact, my attorney the other day, I was in his office and he said, you may not be remembered, but I was one of your scholarship people. I think that winds up my presentation, and thank you, Chris, very much for having me be here to give it.
I knew a little bit about the industry when I came into this job, but I soon found out that there's more I didn't know. And I had a chance to learn a lot of that at the feet of George, who fortunately was here for several years during the transition. One of my goals was to visit in every county in the state, all of our members around the state, to get to know them. And I mostly succeeded in that. I didn't get in every county, mostly because we didn't have members in every county. There are a few counties in the eastern part of the state that we were not represented in at the time. But I did learn a lot in the process, and I think we had a little more grassroots involvement as a result. I came here from the Department of Agriculture, and having that background and contacts experience was a great help in making the transition and hopefully being more effective for our industry. And I had been at the USDA prior to that time as well, and especially in our marketing activities and export efforts, those contacts were very helpful. But the guidance I got from George Greenleaf was the most useful of all. He was a wealth of knowledge about the state, about the industry, and proved to be big shoes to fill. In fact, I think he wore 7 league boots. The conventions and trade shows we had were, I think, a highlight of the experience. We had some super entertainment and speakers and inspirational educational programs that I think paid off. And it was a way to showcase our scholarship students at the tech schools in particular, who didn't get the chance to do those kind of activities otherwise. And I was very fortunate in being able to be involved in things beyond the state with the National Grain and Feed Association, the U.S. Chamber of Commerce programs, and Association of Executives. George had the CAE designation, and that was a goal that was well worth striving for. A little difficult to achieve, but we made it. One of the interesting things as I look back on the political contacts I made in those days, I was able to help in the very first campaign of Mike DeWine, who later became our senator and is now our attorney general, and of John Boehner in his first run for the House. And we're still very close personal friends, even though he's now speaker. And I got to work with him closely in the early days, and those contacts pay off. The thing I'd like to leave you with is something that I put together a couple years ago when George had a special birthday occasion, and that is a tribute to George and the pattern he set in the association management for the state in all kinds of trade associations, not just our industry. And it comes through in spelling out his name, George. G obviously is for George. There's only one George. In fact, he liked that initial so well, he's got 3 G's in his name. E for enthusiasm. George is and was always a dynamo of energy and enthusiasm. Now, O stands for Ohio, and I know he came here from Michigan, but I think in the process of the interim period, we've made a Buckeye out of him, so we'll claim him as a Buckeye. R is for responsible. George got things done. He always did what he said he was going to do, and he was responsible for a lot of progress for agribusiness in general and our trade in particular. The other G is for green. That's in his name. He's green and still growing, and has never stopped with his energy and ambition and efforts to contribute to the common good. And the last E is for energy. He is an energetic human being, and I call him effervescent. In fact, I've never seen George when he effervescent.
One of the things I'm asked, being from the area of East Lansing, Michigan, is how does a Michigan State guy, first of all, get into this business when he was never brought up on a farm? And number 2, how does he get into Ohio to participate in the association business? And I really think I was destined to be here for many reasons. I remember that my first real job was in the area of ag, and it was with Michigan Millers Mutual Insurance Company. In the early 60s, I interviewed for the job. I told them I really didn't know oats from wheat. But I was enthusiastic, and I thought I could do the job in the insurance, and it turned out to be their mill and elevator department. At that time, I thought the elevator was something passengers rode up and down in a building, and sure enough it is, but more importantly, it's an important part of the agribusiness culture. My job was to write the insurance specifically for agricultural business, and particularly grain and elevators, and liked the job pretty well. More and more got involved with agriculture. And then one day, OSHA, Ohio Safety and Health Act, came along, and they wanted dust-proof boxes everywhere. They wanted everything just the way they wanted it. And a guy by the name of George Greenleaf, this would have been in the early 60s, I think, George, and his counterpart in Michigan, Stan Sherman. And by the way, at that time, there were all of these legends in each of the states, George being one, Stan being one. Every state had their own guy that was running things in their states. And George said, Gary, you're pretty well up on the electrical requirements and why we shouldn't have to do all these things at the cost that they're going to require, et cetera, et cetera. Stan Sherman and I are going to Washington, D.C. They know us too well, and they're not going to listen to what we have, but I think they will take the word of a young insurance guy, and we'd like to have a house testimony, and we'd like to have you represent us. I turned whiter than a sheet, I'm sure. I was probably early 30s at the most, and I said, well, gosh, that's a real opportunity. I really would like to do that. And so they whipped me into the car, and there's George Greenleaf, Stan Sherman, and Gary King in a car on their way to Washington, D.C. These guys knew their way around Washington like there was no tomorrow. They knew all the places to eat. Everybody they'd see on the street, they seemed to know. They knew their way into the House representatives. They knew their way around the state Senate. And I said, boy, this is kind of neat. These guys really know what they're going to do. We went straight to a motel that they had, somebody had reserved for them. I thought, this is a good deal. George says, I'm in this bed. He says, Stan's in this bed, and that's yours over there, and that was a couch over there in the corner, but I really didn't care. It was exciting. We got through the testimony pretty well, and on the way back, I said, I could do this. I kind of like this. Well, it turns out that about 3 or 4 years later, Stan Sherman retired. They hired another person who decided he did not like the job that well, and soon he left. And they came to ask if I would be interested in running the the Michigan Agribusiness Association. And I said, well, gee, I can't run it. I'm not even on the board. I participate a lot in it, but I'm not even on the board. And they said, we don't mean a board member. We mean as the executive. I was pretty nervous about it, but I said, well, let's give it a try. And then for about 4 or 5 years, I was the executive for the Michigan Agribusiness Association. Got a chance to see John once or twice a year as we attended National Grain and Feed conventions and association businesses and so on. And so not only had I known George, then I had known John. And it was about, I believe, in the real early 90s, I think, John, that you had decided to take a position in Washington, D.C., almost like your second home, I think, down there at times. And I was approached by the board here in Ohio to come down and interview for the position. And I was pretty well established in Michigan. I loved my Michigan State Spartans, and I said, well, Ohio's nice, and John has painted a pretty picture down there, but I don't think so. And we said no about 3 or 4 times, and the next thing you know, I'm down here interviewing. And on my way home, I had basically told the interview committee that I really thought I was going to stay in Michigan, but the more I thought about it as I drove home, the more I thought about maybe the opportunity is there. Maybe I'm there for a reason. And I stopped on the way home, and at that time we didn't have the cell phones, so we used a phone in a convenience store, called back down. Somebody had to run and get one of the guys in the committees, and I said, I left you with a negative impression about my decision to come to Ohio. I said, I really have changed my mind. And I said, I just called my wife, and she's willing, and if the position is open and I'm the person of your choice, I'd like to be that person. And so that's how I got to Ohio, I think in May of 1990. They had told me a lot of the good things about the business. One of the things they had neglected to tell me as I took over on May of 1990 was that the Ohio Agribusiness Association, like many associations in the country, had their own self-insurance, health insurance programs. And I think probably every state in the country had their own version of a self-insurance program. But it was about that time that expenses were going up, premiums were going up, and the boards of directors of the various states were really wearing two hats. Number one, they were the people who asked for the premiums, but number two, they were the people who paid the premiums as well. The Ohio Agribusiness Association at that time was in serious trouble because we had some claims that far exceeded the economic base that we were founded on, and it was about a 1.5-year project that I and our staff worked on to work that through, and it was just through a few quirks and a few things by the insurance companies that they forgot to document that we got out of that for about $70,000 or $80,000. Top of that, shortly after I got there, we had an office on High Street up in Worthington, Michigan, and they told us that they were going to remodel the building. They'd like to move us down the hall, remodel our space, and then about 6 months later bring us back. We decided at that time, well, gee, if we're going to move, let's just move once. We moved a little further south and stayed on High Street in Worthington. And then about 11 or 12 years ago, we moved the office to our present location on Reed Road, which is in Columbus. I guess at that point, we were ready to settle in, and we started doing some things, making some changes. A few of those changes, I was a real believer in using the entire board for everything that we did. I didn't believe in using a lot of the executive committee decisions if we didn't have to get them together on the side. And that's proven to be very, I think, very helpful in that the whole board is always involved in everything that we do. It's not a 2 or 3 person making the decisions. We believe in very strong committees. We believe in giving those committees not only the power to be creative, but the authority and the ability to move ahead with their decisions. In my case, I shifted a little more towards the regulation rather than the legislation. We got to know ODA very well. We're very proud of our relationship with them. And all in all, it's been a great 21 years, and I certainly wish Chris all the best as he takes a hold of the reins. He's hit the ground running, and I have no fear about the leadership and the future of the Ohio Agribusiness Association. I think one of the things that I have become more and more aware of as times change and the world changes, and that's how strong and how much the seed portion of our industry has taken over as the linchpin of our industry. I can remember where seed and their associations, when they became a part of the Ohio Agribusiness Association, were really kind of the last one you thought about as having the impact on the industry. And today with GMOs and stacking of genes and so on, they have become the industry and has literally affected, I think, every part of our business today.
I think you're right, Gary, that as I've met with folks in the industry and we talk about the future and so on, this whole technology, the technology that we have today, whether it be in seed or whether it be in other aspects of the business, technology has really just continued to grow by leaps and bounds, and it's hard to predict what the next 5 to 10 years will be like.
One of the things that I think has changed, I remember as a boy, my dad would be down in town on Saturday night visiting with neighbors and so forth, and so maybe he sold a load of wheat, you know, and I said a load of wheat. I didn't say number of bushels, and the elevator man would be there visiting with neighbors too, and he'd write down the price and so forth. Well, it rained on Monday, maybe Tuesday. And so Wednesday or Thursday, why we come down, and you know the price we got? The price he'd put on his paper on Saturday night. Now that's not happening anymore in the industry, and it's changed not just in our industry, not just in business, but with people everywhere. Their belief, you know, in the old honor system has changed, and we have to cope for that by putting in place, not just in finances, but in life, a different procedure to make sure, you know, we're working with people, for people, and helping them.
The point that George makes, and Gary also, in that the technology is really the driving force of all industry today, and we have to keep up with it if we can. Be nice to be ahead of it, but it's probably not possible, but certainly be up with it, not just in terms of communication, but also in terms of the products that we produce and how they're handled. All this new technology is just changing so fast. And our producers are now more technically savvy than they used to be. And going back to our scholarships to the colleges, we need to have technologically proficient employees, and finding well-trained employees able to handle all this at prices we can afford. The thing I remember most, I can't remember the young lady's name. She'd worked for Landmark, then when she went out on her own and in personnel activities, and we worked with her on some programs. And she said, well, when she was in agribusiness and agriculture, and she got out into larger fields, she found out two things: that ag people work twice as hard and get paid half as much.
I think that's one of the importance. John brings up the need for people, and the scholarship program, which of course we have the George Greenleaf Agri-Industry Award, and then we have the OABA scholarship in addition to that. Basically, you founded that to a degree, and then we formalized it when I came along. But we're somewhere around $35,000 a year in financial help that we give up and coming people who are going to propagate our industry in the future, from OSU, from ATI, from Clark, and Wilmington colleges. And it's a key part of our associations is to make sure those young people continue to come up the ladder and fit in and recognize our business and propagate our industry, as I say.
And you know, Gary, you and I have had lots of conversations about that, and I, although I was obviously aware of the scholarship program before I came on board, I've been very surprised at just what depth the program has, and the different schools that we reach out to across Ohio, and the amount of dollars we're able to provide for scholarships. Our industry really does a great job of raising funds for those scholarships, and you know, that's a testament to my predecessors as well. We talked about relationships earlier, George, and that shows that we do have great relationships with our members, and they're willing to provide for the next generation. I was very impressed with that as I came on board and became more acquainted with the association.
You have a great system of communications, technically way above what I had or John had. Tell us about your system, about how you can send an email from where it all goes and where you can receive it from. And
well, you know, we're fortunate with technology. Technology can be a blessing, but it can also be a curse sometimes. But in this case, in association management in particular, we have a database where we have quite a few emails. Now, we're always trying to gather more emails and make sure those are current. But we're able to put out a weekly e-newsletter we call OABA News and Notes. Once a week, we compile the stories and send them out on a Friday afternoon. And those stories are linked back to our website. So when you click on the link in your email, it takes you to our website. And then when you're on our website, it encourages folks to look at other things. They can leave comments on the news stories that are on that website and have a running dialogue. And then we have another great thing, George, called social media these
Right.
days that you're very aware of, but of course you didn't have those tools during your tenure. But we're working on Facebook and LinkedIn, and we're working on getting a Twitter account. It's just another way to reach out to people. Not everyone uses those tools, but you want to make sure those tools are being used by the association so you're reaching the maximum number of people.
More people will be using it.
That's right, that's right.
Uh,
And it never ceases to amaze me how many of our members do get onto Facebook, onto our page and things like that. A lot of folks are using it.
Can you imagine what my secretary used to say when I look at a front page that was all printed, or at least she had it ready to be printed, and I'd say, we've got to strike this. They've just changed down there, and it's now this. So she'd have to go back, retype the whole page, put it back in the mimeograph, and start all over again. And my name was Mudd, M-U-D, but you know, we had to have it right. You could put out wrong.
I can't fathom that, George. It's because we have Microsoft Word or any other
Sure.
processing, and you just backspace and delete and reprint it. So
Don't have to use that whiteout.
That's right. That's right.
Well, you know, in spite of all of these changes, one thing does remain constant, and that's a good thing, and that's the need to belong to an association.
That's right.
There's still strength in numbers, we know that. They're more economical, they're more efficient to achieve the goals that membership wants to achieve. And so that's a great thing we have going for us. We just need to nurse it and nourish it and move it ahead in today's world, which, Chris, I think you're ready to do.
And the important base that you have is people.
That's right.
So pick the best people that you can get, and you know, whether you have to take them to lunch or what you have to do, but it's an important part of your role is selecting people, regardless of industry, regardless of whether they're a two-man shop, as Gary talked about earlier, or a national. That's what will drive you. It won't be what you do, it's what your people do with you
That's right.
that becomes important. I long ago learned that being a lobbyist, my key people were the members that had coffee with my legislator out in the district.
Mm-hmm.
They were the keys, more than,
Don't take no for an answer.
yeah, amen. It was kind of fun, really, in lots of ways, to work with the legislation, legislators. I think I had as good relationships with the Speaker of the House, who was a Democrat from down by the river, as I did with some of the Republicans. And their word was their bond, which you took for granted. A lobbyist, his word has to be his bond, or he's gone. They don't depend on him anymore. How much that's changed, I've been gone for 27 years, so I'm not sure, but if you read the papers, it seems to me there's a difference, and there's a cutthroating going on about where people stand, and it's not always comes out as the truth as we have known it. That probably bothers the public as much as anything, I think. And when you say you're a lobbyist, that becomes a dirty word anymore compared to the role we used to have and believe in.
The big change certainly in Ohio, of course, has been term limits. And you don't have speakers who have this long history that folks know, and they know the system.
Bert Reif was who I was talking about, of course.
So we have to learn to deal with that, because that's the reality of today. But I think the biggest need in that regard is getting our membership actively involved, knowing their legislators at the membership level in their districts. They'll listen to them more than they will listen to a paid lobbyist, and we can back up and support and coordinate and help all that. But getting our members politically involved, active, supporting members, getting to know them, relationships is key. It's hard to do, but it's very important.
John, you indicated term limits. Does that necessitate people like us, and particularly Chris, who's going to be active, that we get to know their staff and get to know the regulators and so on better, because they're going to be the only constant the legislators are going to be passing through. On the other hand, the legislators are going to want to leave a mark as well. So you really got to be on board with both the legislators, their staff, and the regulators. I think you need to spread yourself a little thinner these
Big
days.
job to do.
That's right. That's right. It is. I think it is a bigger job. And Gary, term limits came about during your tenure, so you have firsthand experience with how that evolved. And of course, even before I came to the Ohio Agribusiness Association, I lobbied for a few years, and those legislative relationships are so critical, George, like you talked about. But it's a lot harder today than it was in your day to develop those relationships. We're fortunate to have a couple folks that have been around for a number of years, like our current speaker,
Yep.
Bill Batchelder.
Yeah.
But we're going to have less and less of those kind of folks.
I've had at least one breakfast and some other meetings with him, and I don't think he needs a lot of encouragement. He's in tune to the industry. He's got a farmer background. He understands that they need to make the farming in Ohio better through their work. And so that's part of the association's role, and he embraces that well.
Work the grassroots, get to know the industry, but more importantly, for them to get to know him.
Well, Chris doesn't need a lot of advice. He's a man of his own stature, and certainly not only has become a business person that I respect, and that we have done several things together and talked about many things, but have grown to consider him a friend as well. I think a few of the things that he will need to remember is that, first of all, that every member in the Ohio Agribusiness Association has only one vote. So if a member has 2 or 3 employees, he's just as important to our association as the large international type organizations that are also members. My predecessors, I think, have mentioned CAE, which stands for Certified Association Executives. Both George and John and myself have all achieved that designation. In this day, I think it's extremely important that you become a CAE. Chris has already signed up and will be on his way within 2 or 3 years of study and all the requirements that he needs to meet to accomplish that. And again, I think we need to, being as diversified as we are, one of the things when I first came down was to merge the 3 organizations. John indicated the value of that. But as diversified as we are, it's important that we have extremely strong committees, and I think Chris has already seen the value of that.
Tell you what, I can't thank these 3 gentlemen enough for spending time with us today, and not just today, but you know, I've turned to all of you at one point or another, whether it was in the interview process or since I've been on board, and picked your brain and gotten input from you. And of course, Gary and I have spent the most time together as we've transitioned, and you guys have just been very, very helpful to me in a wealth of knowledge. And don't think you're off the hook after today. We're going to continue to look to you for guidance and insight. This has just been super. And I got to tell you that knowing the kind of support that I have makes me feel a lot better about the job I have to do in the future, because I know that there's support there, and there's help there, and there's folks who've been through what I'm going through. So I appreciate that very much.